This video is going to go backwards from the solutions back to the factored form. So we're going backwards here. Earlier we were solving by factoring, and we would factor, and then we would set our factors equal to 0. So for example, right, you would factor. First step is obviously set one side equal to 0, so that was the blue highlighted step, and then you factor, right? So we get this little yellow highlighted section, now we got to factor, or solve it. So the yellow highlighted is already factored, now we have to solve. Well, to solve, you set each of the factors equal to 0, and you solve for the x value. Well, when we're going backwards, so for example, if I were going forwards here, I would set each one equal to 0, so this would be x plus 3 equals to 0. And this is x plus 2 equal to 0. And you're like, well, where does that 0 come from? Because here I see a y. Well, in the previous problems, we'd have 0 on the other side, right? It's equal to 0 on one side. Well, remember that a solution to a quadratic is its x-intercepts. Well, what does an x-intercept look like? It's number comma 0. So what number is in for the y value? 0. So that's why we plug in a 0 for the y. So on the previous day, you got to this step, and then you solve for x, you would subtract by 3, and get x by itself, so you get negative 3. And then you would do minus 2 on both sides, so x equals negative 2. So your two solutions, your two x-intercepts, two roots, two zeros, are negative 3 and negative 2. But now we got to go backwards. Well, what do you notice about going backwards? Well, I got to go backwards from this step back to this step. Well, what's the only thing that's different? The only thing that's different is that now they're in parentheses and they have opposite signs. So we're going to do the first example. Let's say our solutions are 3 and negative 4. Now this is written a little bit differently, but all this means is that one of your solutions is x equals 3 and the other one is x equals negative 4. Okay, so these are our two solutions. But now we have to go backwards. Well, I know that a quadratic equation has a y in it, so y equals. And I want to write this in factored form. Well, I just went over here and noticed that the signs are the same, or the opposite. They're the same. I have x and I have the 3, but the sign is opposite and it's inside parentheses. So here, since I have x equals 3, inside my parentheses I would have x minus 3. I would have the opposite sign. Over here, since I have negative 4, when I plug it in the parentheses, it's going to be x plus 4. So it's opposite signs. So that's what you would do if it's just a whole number. You just plug it into parentheses and put the opposite sign with the number. So this would be our final equation, our quadratic equation. And if I were to graph this in Desmos, the way it was written here in my blue box, I would actually get x-intercepts at positive 3 and negative 4. And I'll show you that. So let's type in y equals, oops, I forgot the y equals x minus 3, and then x plus 4. Now remember, it's opposite signs from what they gave us. So they told us that the solutions were 3 and negative 4. Well, let's double check if that's true. 3 and negative 4, those are our two x-intercepts. But in the equation, they're opposite signs. Now here we have some fractions. Now I have them both as fractions because you could have a possibility that both of your solutions are at a fraction. So how do I do this? Well, you can't just do the exact same thing. We don't want fractions inside our parentheses. Okay, so here's the first step. You take the numerator, which is the top number, and you add it or subtract it from x, but opposite sign. So I know for a fact that an x is going to be involved in the parentheses. So let's go ahead and write y equals, okay, so actually, no, let's not go to that step yet. I kind of skipped and went ahead of myself. So I know that x is going to be involved. You're going to take the numerator. That is your top number. The numerator for this first solution is 3. And so because it's a positive 3, I'm going to subtract 3. Okay? So you're going to take the numerator. You're going to either add it or subtract it depending on whatever that number is, but you're going to do the opposite. So because it's a positive 3 in the numerator, I'm going to put minus 3. The next step is you put the denominator, which is the bottom number, in front of the x. Okay, so the denominator here is 2, so the 2 would go in front of the x. So you have 2x minus 3. So that means in my parentheses, one of my parentheses will be 2x minus 3. One of my factors is 2x minus 3. Okay, let's do the same thing with this one. Okay, the first step is you have an x, you're going to either add or subtract the numerator number. The numerator in this case is -1, but the opposite of that is going to be +1. And then what do you do next? You're going to take the denominator and you're going to put it in front of the x, just like we did over here. Take the 3, do the opposite sign, and then you take the 2 and put it in front of the x. So the other set of parentheses would be 5x plus 1. If I were to graph this, I would get two solutions. I would get one at 3/2 and one at -1/5. So let's go ahead and try that out. Y equals 2x minus 3, and then 5x plus 1. Okay, so this is my quadratic. If I tap on it, I get 1.5 and -0.2. Well, what's -0.2 equal as a fraction? If I click on that fraction, I get -1/5. Okay, so that's going to be that solution. So -1/5 was correct. The other one was 1.5. Well, what's 1.5 as a fraction? 3/2. So -1/5 and 3/2, which is exactly what my solutions are. So that's how you can check. You can always use Desmos to check. But this would be our final factored form. We're going backwards from solution to the factored form instead of going the other way around.